You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's good to see you, Geoff.
Good to see you too, Kate.
Oh my gosh, I'm missing Mike already. He's back in the in the strategy suite waiting for us, polishing, conditioning the leather on those nice armchairs we keep back there, I think.
Okay, good.
So he'll join us in the strategy suite where we'll talk about wildfires and whether BC is or can be ready for what's coming. We'll also talk about the Conservative healthcare plan and about the latest nominations of note. But first, our guest today, and we've said it before on the show, has built one of the strongest personal political brands in BC. Adam Olsen was first elected as a Green MLA for Saanich North and the Islands in 2017, when he and two Green Party colleagues made the historic call to support a minority NDP government through a confidence and supply agreement. Over the years, he has stepped in twice as interim leader for the BC Greens, has been a vocal critic of LNG and a champion of reconciliation and Indigenous rights. A member of the Sartlip First Nation, Adam announced in June that after 7 years as an MLA, he would be stepping down to focus on his family and his own mental health and well-being. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Adam Olsen.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. 7 years as an MLA, 16 years in one form of elected public-facing office or another. So the MLA job was 7 years, but the public service has been going on for quite a while.
Well, let's pick that apart, because I think so. You were quite young when you were first elected. How old were you? In your 20s? Is that right?
Oh, is that 34? No, 30, okay. 34, something like
early
that, yeah.
30s. Tell me a little bit, was there a big difference in terms of that toll the work took on your mental health and sort of the commitment that took you away from your family when you were a counselor versus working as an MLA?
I've always taken an approach where I was fully engaged. Public service for me was always a job that took all of my attention, and I gave it all of my attention. I really enjoyed the opportunity to serve the communities in the variety of roles that I have, both as a counselor and as a representative for Central Saanich at a variety of different regional boards and bodies and groups, and then as somewhat removed, but still very involved in the community in terms of community organizing in that kind of interregnum period, about 4 years from 2013 to 2017, where I was not an elected official, but I was the interim leader of the BC Greens for a time, and was organizing in the Saanich Inlet around an LNG facility that was being proposed there. Also organizing around a project where they were building a house on top of a grave island and just in Ganges. So that was some more community organizing. So, and then as an MLA and as a constituency MLA, I took that part of my job very, very seriously in terms of advocating for the people who walked through the door. No matter what the issue was, I was going to do my best to try to raise the issues and solve the problems. And then as a legislator, also very engaged as a legislator, doing my best to be a part of the bills that came forward. The government's agenda was part of our job as an important part of our job as an opposition member is to critique government, make sure we're asking the questions, and to test the legislation that's coming forward. I had the unique opportunity in a confidence and supply arrangement to do some of that testing in advance of, working with government and putting ideas out in front so that they had a chance to shape and form legislation with that advanced knowledge of where I was coming from on things. Working very much as a colleague to Scott Fraser as an example with the Declaration Act. Scott and I became quite good friends during that time, just as I've really enjoyed the relationship I had since 2020 with Murray Rankin on the Indigenous relations issues, and working on a variety of committees. And the Police Act committee work that I did was a real surprise to me. I never thought that I was going to get involved in public safety as I have over the last 4 years. So I never have counted my public service in years. It's always just been, I'm going to continue to do this as long as I can serve the people in the way that I feel they deserve to be served. And at the moment that the question came into my heart that I was not going to be able to do that, I had a moment of reconciliation for myself, and it was at that moment that I decided that it was time to step back and find something else to do, and focus on the things that were that over the last 16 years have been part of my life, but have been a part of my life that has not had that focus. So my family, my own personal health and well-being, and perhaps give myself an opportunity to focus on issues that are personally that are personally important to me and to the community that I'm a part of.
When you made that decision, who was the first person you told?
My wife. I actually had a conversation with Sonia about this. Was that I think that if I had the political conversation first, it would probably be a different situation right now. But we were kind of laying in bed in the darkness, and I said to Emily, I said, I don't know that I can run. Well, I know that I can run, but I don't know that I have it in my heart to do another full 4 years. And I'm the guy that stepped down from my seat at Central Saanich Council because there was a by-election in advance of the 2013 election. I gave up my seat and ran because I wanted the public to know that I wasn't seat hunting. I wasn't doing this as an effort to try to kind of improve my lot, and then if I failed, I'd just fall back to where I was. This was a step that I wanted to take seriously. So I stepped away from my seat. There was a by-election already happening, and I said I intend on winning. And so for me, it's always been really important that that this public service is at the heart of it, is the thing that I want to do, and that I'm going to finish what I commit to the public that my intention is 4 years, and I'm standing on their doorstep saying, elect me for the next 4 years. I really couldn't justify asking for that support, knowing that there might only be 2 or 1.5 or 3 so I said that to her, and then it opened up a conversation that the full scope of the impact personally, and then with my immediate family. When I first got elected, Silas, my son, was 1 year old. Next year, he's graduating. So some of this context started to really show up for me. My daughter Ella's been in public life her entire life. She was born into public life, and so she's now going into grade 7. So some of this context showed up for me in a way that I didn't really expect it. And once we had that conversation, there was no. To me, it was the decision to, after hearing how the family was being impacted, not reluctantly. My family's been engaged, and we're engaged politically, but it was that kind of having the wide open conversation in a way that hadn't happened. So,
Adam, I think it's clear you would have been reelected had you put your name forward again. But looking back over that period, you were one of the first of a handful of Indigenous people to ever be elected to the legislature. You were also one of a handful of people ever to be elected for the Green Party. You had that history in your own community. Can you tell us how you balanced out those different accounts as an Indigenous leader, as a community person from a municipal background, as a member of the Saanich First Nation, and a Green? What was foremost in your mind most days, or can you tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting context, isn't it? I think that I'm a complex. I've always kind of leaned into the complexity of that. It's not easy, but the issues that we're dealing with aren't easy. The complexity exists in the job that we do as elected officials, and I mean, as you know, navigating all of the issues all at once. You have to do it in an authentic way, and so I always just tried to show up for who I am and for the various experiences that I bring to the table. When I got elected in Central Saanich, I was the first person that lived on an Indian reserve in the district to run and to get elected. And so I brought a very different set of skills and experiences to the Central Saanich Council table. And then, as the interim leader of the Greens, I brought a similar skill set as to what I added to being an Indigenous person, and to have that experience. I also brought a municipal experience to, having one of the unique aspects, I think, that I brought to the Greens was that I was somebody that had sat at the table and had to make a decision. And it's easy to talk about making decisions, but it's difficult to make a decision. And I've learned in my time that it's much less about the decisions that you make as an elected official and much more about how you're making the decision and what process you're using and whether or not you can describe to people in an articulate way why you made the decision that you made. I've always come across a response from people. It's not necessarily what I decided or but how I decided it and how I can describe that to people. I think a lot of people and a lot of my constituents understand that we have different opinions, and that's fine. And I think that this is one of the issues that's emerging in our democracies around the world right now is this polarization doesn't allow for us to embrace the differences that people inherently have with each other. You have to be this or that. You have to be one or the other. And that's just not how our complex society operates. There are variations of things. And so I think if we could respect each other for having those different opinions and then be engaged in them. And, I always tried to approach my NDP colleagues in this way. We're not going to entirely agree on things, but there's definitely areas that we can work together on. And I don't want our disagreements to get in the way and impede too much our ability to be successful. It's something that I learned at the council table was one of the people that was built up during the election is going to be one of my greatest foes, ended up being the person that, we had, robust disagreements at the table, but we also did some pretty cool things together. And, I think oftentimes I was the first person he called to see if he could get support on an issue, to do that test, and the same thing going the other way. So, it's always how I've tried to approach it.
It's true to say that if you said no early on, many things would have been dead on arrival. And I want to give you full marks for your willingness to engage even when you had concerns. But just to set the table a bit about, you've had such a long career, we could spend so much time on all parts of it. But you stepped into the interim leadership at the Green Party. You helped at Reconstruction. Andrew Weaver wound up leading the party into the next election. I don't think you stood. That was fine with you. You ran in your riding. You got elected. The three of you now are suddenly holding the balance of power in 2017 as Christy Clark hopes to carve out a new mandate. When you look back on those turbulent days that led to that confidence and supply agreement and think back on that period, what do you take away as your proudest achievements? What do you think the big legacies are of that period for you?
Well, first of all, I remember being on CFAX and being asked by the afternoon host what it felt like having the balance of power. And this was when we were going, from hotel room to hotel room, having those negotiations. And I said, I view the job as more having the balance of responsibility, because I think that what we as elected officials do is we share the responsibility of the province. And so that's, when you ask me what my greatest achievement is I think that I leave the legislature still with that same philosophy that I carried a share of the responsibility of the province, and the share that I carried, specifically over the last 4 years is being a vocal critic of government in terms of making sure that their legislation is robust and withstands a test and not just, introduced and passed. I'd say that, from the intersectionality of my life, all the different things that make up who I am, I have to say that the proudest achievement and the proudest thing that I've been a part of is the passing of the Declaration Act and moving British Columbia from a policy of Aboriginal title denial, a denial of Aboriginal title, to a recognition of Aboriginal title. And I don't think that there's enough focus on just how substantive a philosophical change that is. Joseph Trutch, our first post-Confederation Lieutenant Governor, entrenched in this province a policy of Aboriginal title, a denial of that. And that has cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, with no resolution of the Indian land question that has existed since the 19th century. Moving to a policy of recognition moves us past that and allows us to then sit down at the table and negotiate agreements. It's not free or cheap. We have to solve the Indian land question that exists, but sitting at the table negotiating it is a far more productive way of doing it than forcing it to the courts, having the Crown say a bunch of bitter things about Indigenous people, and then thinking at the end of the decision that we're going to be having a really, cheery negotiating for the implementation at the end of it. So I really think that the biggest and most substantive change that has happened in BC in the 7 years that I've been there is shifting the focus from denial to recognition and moving us from a scenario where every one of these discussions is bitter to, as we see now, productive conversations happening between the Crowns and Indigenous governing bodies, Indigenous governments, in a way that was not possible prior to 2017. I think it took a courageous premier and their team to shift that mentality. I don't know that necessarily all of the complicating factors, were entirely thought through at that time, but I think that the government, the NDP government, saw the necessity of this and did something that, frankly, no other government in the history of this province was willing to do. And I'm not sure how much of that was a result of the confidence and supply agreement. And it was in our platform and it was in their platform, and it was something that we agreed on as one of the projects that we were going to get done in those earliest days. And it took us 2 years to do it, and we got it done. Scott Fraser navigated that. John Horgan provided the political foundation for that to be built on. And really the role that I played was to continue to keep it, to continue to ask questions and to continue to keep, as a good fisherman's son, to keep tension on the line, to keep government reminded that this was the commitment that they made. I would never know if the BC NDP would have pulled back if I wasn't there, but I do know that I was there, adding that tension to the conversation.
Do you fear for it now?
Yeah. What's the future of that? Yeah.
Well, I think that we've got political forces on the right that are leveraging the minority against the majority in this province, threatening property owners that Indigenous title means loss of their private property rights, which is, I think, one of the most egregious things that a politician can do is leverage the and threaten the majority with the be careful because the Indigenous people in this province are going to get all your land and all your investment. It's going to go away. So I think that what we need is Premier David Eby to be as courageous as his predecessor on this and to continue to stay the course. I really think that what British Columbians need to understand is that the liability exists whether we solve the problem or not. It grows, in terms of answering the Indian land question and to resolving title. The underlying title is there. It doesn't need for us to recognize it. It's there. What we as governments and what government needs to recognize is that it is more prudent for us to be negotiating this at a table where we can have as we saw with the Haida agreement, you can create a plan that deals with the complexity over a matter of years. Whereas in the courts, they make a decision and then the implementation happens after the decision. And nothing can really happen leading up to that decision because, of course, you don't know where it's going to go. So it's a far more toxic, far less predictable scenario going to the courts than it is negotiating it at the table. And I think John Rustad and Kevin Falcon know that, but they're trying to win an election, and they're doing exactly what, frankly, politicians in this province have done for decades, and that's leveraging and scapegoating Indigenous people for short-term political gain. And frankly, it's a long-term, very expensive disaster, going backwards from a policy or a legal theory of recognition to a legal theory of denial.
Can we talk this through a bit too? Like, I'm imagining how you would talk to this to maybe just the type of voter who might at a high level, be really supportive of reconciliation work, right? But then hear John Rustad say, and I think he sort of said at a high level, his plan is to tear up UNDRIP and then double down on economic reconciliation. And let's say I'm a voter and I'm hearing in that, like, wow, this stuff around the Land Act, right? Like that got really confusing and hard. And I'm hearing about these business owners who are really getting screwed over by this. And it sounds like John Rustad's got a plan that really is about making Indigenous people like economically whole. And that just seems simpler. That just seems like right. What would you say to that?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack here. Because the current government hasn't done a perfect job on this. The Land Act was mismanaged. I think, when you have an issue such as and I keep referring to it as the Indian land question. There was this, back in the 19th century, there was this stack of papers that had that. It was the Indian land question, and our politicians, our first politicians in this province, knew that what was unresolved was the questionable controlled takeover of land in this province. That it didn't follow what the Crown had instructed. They ran out of money, and they decided at Confederation to ignore it. And that is the burden that we all carry to this day. Whether Rustad and Falcon want to turn and face it or not, it actually, in the end, it doesn't change anything. What it does, if anything, it makes it worse, because economic reconciliation is just what we've had, which is the government controls the flow of all of the flow of resources to First Nations. That Joseph Trutch's policy of denial created a type of dependency on the Crown that I think the Crown is still having a challenging time paying for. And so what we need is not just economic reconciliation. You can't just split out reconciliation to have social reconciliation, economic reconciliation, just because it's uncomfortable to confront the reality of our history. So when it comes right down to it, Aboriginal title is being solved right now in British Columbia two ways: through the judiciary and through the executive and legislative branches. The executive and legislative branches have been trying to set up, through the Declaration Act and through a few of the sections in that act that allow for agreements to be made, a coherent, negotiated, collaborative process. The judiciary creates a conflict-based, expensive, completely unpredictable outcome. And really what Rustad and Falcon are promoting is that latter. We're just going to keep, because by saying economic reconciliation, they're not dealing with the underlying title issue. And by ignoring it, they don't make it go away. They actually make it worse. So they're politically motivated, they're disingenuous, and they're leading British Columbia into an incredibly toxic, extremely expensive approach to dealing with this question that for decades has plagued this province. So when I take a look at the HIDA negotiation, for an example, the opposition parties, the right opposition parties on the right, were basically threatening landowners on Haida Gwaii that they were going to lose their private property rights. Well, the legal reality is that the private property owners on Haida Gwaii are the only British Columbians who have had the burden, the Crown's burden, relieved. Everybody else still carries the burden, but because it's been sorted out with the Haida, and there's a conversation about how to deal with this in a mature way, they've been released of that burden of the question of where title is and how it looks. So the opposite. But we've had a culture in this province of scapegoating Indigenous people. That's just the easy thing to do. It's just cheap politics, and it's super easy to do it. Make people fear that by giving Indigenous people rights, that they're going to lose rights. But the reality is that those rights exist, whether the Crown politicians acknowledge them or not. They don't go away because someone's ignoring them. and frankly, the government over the last number of months, specifically in the spring, left the door wide open for this kind of exploitation. And unfortunately, we had politicians on the political right that were prepared to exploit that door being open. And it was some of the sickest days that I spent in the legislature were listening to the political right exploit that. One of the sickest days that I experienced in the legislature was when the BC United came into a Lamson committee meeting the day before the Speaker's reconciliation action plan was going to be celebrated, a document which was so high level and just basically talking about how the legislative precinct was going to be engaging reconciliation. And out of pure politics, the official opposition House leader comes in and cancels the BC United's participation in that event. Just gross politics and totally unnecessary. But we had the United chasing the Conservatives around the political landscape. And so who pays the price? Directly, Indigenous people pay the price, but indirectly, all British Columbians pay the price because we are steps further away from dealing with this in a mature and coherent manner. So that's probably not how I tell British Columbians about it, because that was way too long-winded to get them. But that's
Well, yeah, side note, I was asking partly so to support my next conversation with my mother-in-law, but well, I'll take some notes from that and amend. Well, so building on to picking on the, criticisms of the EB government, we did have your colleague, Andrew Weaver on the last episode. I know a point just of curiosity. I don't know if you have Hawaiian shirts and play darts, but it's an important measure. Okay, then you might be elitist.
No.
That was one of the takeaways. Another one though is Dr. Weaver had published an op-ed to this point, has a take that David Eby is out of touch, and went so far as to say John Rustad and the Conservatives are positioned to win the upcoming election because they have that better pulse and that better take on where people are at right now. I'm wondering if you think, I know you're not shy to criticize the EB government and you have your criticisms of them, but do you share that assessment?
Well, I mean, I think that it's important to just acknowledge that I think probably the level of access has been diminished. So not surprised that the criticism of the EB government is likely due to the lesser access than we enjoyed with the Horgan
he was actually
government.
he was very open about that. Yeah, he really kind of summarized. It's like, who listens to me? I need someone who listens. Yeah,
not surprising. I think in my perspective of where the EB government is that I did experience much more collaboration from the previous administration. There is I think I stood in the chamber and I said, if we keep operating the way that we're operating, we keep dropping legislation in the day before we start debating it. And if we keep limiting the debate to just a few hours, and this is the practice that we're adopting as a democratic institution, then really what we should do is just have the Premier's office move right into the chamber and just have that be the way that it happens. So under EB's administration, the time and quality of debate was greatly diminished, almost to the point where it was just a performance, relying very heavily on the majority government. Very, very dangerous in a democracy. Many instances, we had a scenario where the public weren't even learning about legislation that was being passed until weeks after I would get emails saying, you need to stand up against bill number whatever. And I said, well, 3 weeks ago we passed, that thing was passed, right? So, and the other aspect of it too, which I think is really problematic for Premier Eby's administration, was the number of times the same statute was being opened and closed in one session. I mean, it was sending a message of just complete disarray in the back end. I remember, in the previous administration, the 2017 to 2020, there was this coherent process that legislation would be brought forward, and again, we were engaged at different aspects of the production of the bill than we were with Eby, and I recognize that. And I'm not lamenting the change in status that I had in the legislature. I'm lamenting the lack of democratic, the commitment to democratic values of an open and informed debate. When the debate is ongoing and my staff are getting briefed at the same time, that's unacceptable. If I'm a member of the opposition and I'm not able to actually be informed about the information that's in the bill and to have time to actually dig in and see what's there in terms of the details, to be able to ask the questions, then my role as an opposition member is greatly diminished. And I think there was a big change from the time that Premier Horgan exited to the time that Premier Eby took over, and just in terms of how that happened. And so, I would say that one of the things that I'll be paying very close attention to from the sidelines over the coming months and years is whether or not we get back to a more democratic style of debate where the opposition members are afforded the ability to actually do their job properly on behalf of British Columbians to ensure that the laws, I mean, we have, I don't know how many laws of Premier Eby's have been challenged in court. And the hope is that the opposition's doing a lot of that test before the law actually gets passed. So that hasn't been my experience over the last year and a half or so.
Adam, can I shift the focus a little bit to your own perspective on the Green Party? Because I would say even on a national level, you're one of the most persistent and consistent front rank leaders of the Green Party. We've had a generation of the Green Party contesting elections in BC, and in 2017, I guess, was sort of the high water mark. You're going to steer the next campaign and then step back. We have Elizabeth May, who's clearly, closer to the end of her career than the beginning, and then a few other MPs, and Adrian Carr and Pete Fry on the Vancouver Council. What's your assessment of the Green Party and what are its future prospects? I mean, it's still polling, 12, 13, 14%, that kind of thing. Sometimes less, sometimes more. You've been there in the trench. What do you think?
Well, I think the range at where we poll has been pretty consistent from the time that I entered the scene in 13 to, it's been up and down, but it's been within that range that you just, I think, as high as 17 or 18% and as low as 12 or 13%, depending on where it's at. I think there's been some polls where it's been lower than that recently. But, I think my assessment of the role that the BC Greens have played is one of like a conscience of the legislature, raising issues that other parties are not prepared to raise. And I actually think that it's a super important role that we play in the BC Legislature. The conversation that we had in 2017 was a unique conversation because of the way that the Greens perceived themselves and the role that they had in terms of public service first, rather than kind of the pursuit of power, right? And perhaps it was because of where we sat on the political landscape and where we, the number of seats that we had and all of that. But it's incredibly difficult to break into the legislature in a two-party system. We did that. There was three of us that, Andrew got elected in 2013, and then three of us got elected in 2017. That in and of itself is a tremendous feat when you have basically a bipartisan arrangement. And we now have four parties, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the Conservatives still haven't elected anybody there. They have got a robust caucus of people who got elected under one banner and decided to move to a different banner. And so I think that it's an interesting assessment to say that the Conservatives are poised for a win, but it's not for anything that they've done. I mean, they've not they have rode the coattails of Pierre Paulette. That's, I've sat next to John Rustad for the last 8 months, and I can tell you that he has showed up every day for question period, and then became invisible in every other important function of the House. Bill debate, absent. Budget debate, absent. Committees, the important hiring committees, the important committees on the operation of review of legislation, absent. So the public facing piece, getting the good content that can be then social media optimized and all of that, very good. But my worry is on the ability to actually govern. And so the role that I think that we as Greens play in the BC Legislature is one of full engagement in the debate, of participating and asking questions that are not being asked, asking questions about the most vulnerable British Columbians. As I referenced earlier, keeping tension on the line with respect to the mental health crisis in unique ways, the opioid crisis in unique ways, continuing to raise issues on LNG and on the rapid expansion of the fossil fuel industry in British Columbia and a climate crisis. We've been uniquely positioned to be the only one that's asking questions about old growth. So that is a very, very valuable role. It adds a dimension to the legislature that I think has definitely added value. And so, my perspective is we continue to elect members of the Green Caucus to fulfill that role, and we earn seats from there. And I recognize that nothing should be handed in a democracy. It's difficult work. Getting elected as a Green is the hardest route to the legislature. That's what I've often said. It takes unique people to get elected there under that banner. And I think that once you're there, that journey affords you the ability to take a unique place in the chamber and the role that you play there.
Can we stay there for a sec? Because I'm a little bit fascinated by what the future is of the Green Party. And one of my reflections too from spending some time with Dr. Weaver was he so much embodied something I feel like is certainly, I'm going to say an older version of the BC Greens, not sort of temporarily, like in terms of time, but more maybe some of the older voter base who maybe take a more conservative worldview, struggle with pro-density measures, maybe a bit more of a conservation environmentalist view over a carbon emissions reduction view, right? And I'm going to contrast him with someone like the fellow in Kitchener federally, I think it's Mike Morris, maybe, right, who kind of was elected in the sort of suburban setting with a like bike lanes kind of density message. There's such a distance between those types of Greens, and I'm wondering, like, how is the Green Party going to reconcile? Like, where's the Green Party going, and how is the party going to move? I'll pick on the BC Greens right now. How do you move through a transition like that? Those are big tensions.
And I think that they're not entirely unique to the Greens. I think that we're seeing a political tension in most political parties in this province right now. There's a political tension in the BC United. There's a political tension in the BC NDP as they've moved to the center to become that fossil fuel party that the BC Liberals were. And there's the BC Conservative. Well, Geoff and I have had some conversations about this over the years, but that is the space that they're occupying, and the Conservatives are occupying the conservative part of that vote that fragmented. The BC Greens, I think that the fact that the economics, the current economics that people are experiencing right now, has overshadowed the climate crisis that we're facing. I think is problematic politically, because we're losing ground on the issues around climate change that we really need to be taking seriously. And so the BC Greens' role is to continue to force the rest of the political landscape to really be thinking about what it is that they're doing and the decisions that they're making and how they're rationalizing those decisions. Because, the BC Greens of 2017 were absolutely not going to support LNG. In fact, we've, forced the BC NDP to vote 14 times or something on a tax measure to make a point about our position on LNG. It wasn't about just the economics. It was about the climate. It was about the whole move from the BC economy going to LNG. So, I think that when you ask what role the BC Greens can play, they can play the role that I've played in this podcast already, complaining about how our democracy is being eroded by the way that the House is operating, raising the issues around the electrification of our province and the massive amounts of those electrons going to greenwash an LNG industry that still is, polluting in all of the ways that fracking and pipelines and the industry pollutes. So, I think that we do need to have an effective conscience in the legislature that isn't just primarily operating based on the principle of I need to do whatever it takes to get elected. We need to improve the democratic debate, and I think that largely the response that I've had from people when I announced that I was stepping back was exactly how I've been framing the future of the BC Greens and what it needs to be, which is vocal critics who are demanding good public policy and a robust democracy, and a move towards autocracy and taking advantage of the specific system that we have in this province right now, which is not very democratic at its heart, that need not slide further away from those democratic values.
Adam Olsen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I think you've lived up to all the things we try and do at Hotel Pacifico and try and take a hard look at how to make our democracy as healthy as it can be here in BC. And I appreciate your comments today. I hope we can have you back again. We'll start looking for excuses.
Well, I will do my job over the next number of months, and then we'll be very happy to reconnect with you and to have these conversations about BC politics from a different perspective, obviously not from a seat in the House, but I really appreciate the opportunity to exchange these ideas. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that for decades the BC Greens and the BC NDP have lived uncomfortably alongside one another. And what I think we proved in 2017, and what I can hope continued to prove over the 4 years since 2020, is that people with different opinions, people with different ideas, can actually have those robust debates and still like each other, still appreciate. It was good to see Geoff's face, coming in here. Right, I felt good about that, even though we had our differences of opinions, and I had my conversations with John Horgan, and I've had my conversations with David Eby. I think that we need to really get back to this, to a tone of politics where we can disagree with each other, we can agree with each other, and in the end, it's generative for our province and not degrading our province and the democracy that I think we all hold so deeply.
Yes, I just realized I've been asking you to trust me for the last few weeks. As we talked about the importance of connectivity and its benefits to the local economy, I haven't yet backed my claims. Don't take my word for it when it comes to connectivity. Ask residents of the newly connected Chouatil First Nation. A TELUS fiber project funded partly by the province brought high-speed internet to Chouatil and 10 other communities in 2021. Residents report improved access to healthcare and other essential services, an enhanced ability to work remotely, and reduced need to commute. They say high-speed connectivity has strengthened ties within the community while increasing access to educational and economic opportunities outside of it. And a new government report released in June backs their claims with numbers. The 2024 Rural BC Connectivity Benefits Study examines the economic and social impacts of high-speed internet projects in rural British Columbia. The study analyzed 132 high-speed internet projects funded through the Connecting British Columbia program and found that over the course of a decade, they created 1,820 new jobs, increased GDP by $223.7 million, generated $138 million in additional labor income, and a total of $76 million in provincial and municipal or regional tax revenues. The Rural BC Connectivity Benefits Study forecasts that the province's investment will yield more than $8 in economic growth for every $1 invested and will benefit more than 73,000 rural households. Now, that's good evidence-based policy we can all get behind, backed by strong support from hometown teen TELUS.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Welcome back to the Strategy Suite. It's good to see you, Mike.
Yes, the leather chairs are looking nice and shiny for your arrival.
Love it back here. It's good to be here. There's a couple of things, now that I have the two of you together, there's a couple of things from last week's episode I want to ask you both about. And I'm going to start with a bit of an amuse-bouche, if you will, Mike, because your cougar rug is bringing up so many questions across the internet. No one understands. And I want to say, I am with Snickers the cat on this one. This just sounds fishy. I don't understand why you have a cougar
Fishy
rug.
or cougary? Well, look, we invite Bob Kronbauer, BC Bob, onto the podcast last week. And with his amazing social media following of over 200,000 on Instagram and TikTok, and the one clip he chooses to use is Cougar in a Box.
That's how you succeed on social media.
Over 15,000 people viewed this
endorse.
video of the Cougar in a Box, and it's not exactly on brand for Hotel Pacifico, Bob. But so we'll see. We'll see if we invite you back next time. Maybe we'll pre-negotiate the clips next time.
I don't know. I'm gonna say we meander in some weird spaces, and Mike, you're usually leading the way. I have to say.
Well, especially when it comes
just underlines Mike's take no prisoners attitude to this kind of thing.
As we all know, BC Liberals were all about cougars and boxes back in the day. We were also about the owl and the airbag. Let's not forget that as well.
Yeah,
so
the owl and the airbag. Oh God!
I try to bring nature into the show.
You are unparalleled in the unique way
it's
you
always,
bring nature in.
It's always dead.
Poor old Jeff's just out in a sailboat, and I'm out there in the wilds.
Okay, but yeah, and Geoff, were you on your sailboat writing thank you notes to Andrew Weaver? Because I have to grab you for a sec to say Andrew had some takes and some.
I just came away thinking he's not going to vote NDP in the coming election, and he's pretty annoyed at David Eby. It was vintage Weaver for sure, and I wished he'd been a bit more specific about where he landed with John Rustad on the climate plan, which was his legacy, which John Rustad seems to have profound doubts about, at least, especially the carbon tax, which was a big part of it. Anyway, good conversation with Andrew. It's never that hard to get him going, and he certainly got going.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation.
Certainly had a lot to say. Certainly had some feedback from people afterwards saying, I don't think what he said was right there. For instance, rather, some would say mundane issue of slash piles in the woods. Yeah. One expert on forestry I heard from the Nanaimo area was scratching his head on that one, but maybe get those slash piles out of the woods. I don't know.
Go ahead, Kate.
Oh no, it's just a high level observation that I often get texts about the shows from people who listen. Usually they're sort of in the kind of few days after they drop. All the texts I got about that were immediate. Like as soon as the episode dropped, people were reacting to Weaver.
Go ahead. The one that went racing by for me was decriminalization, which he said was completely tone deaf, and the government needed to retreat on that. And But really, decriminalization was kind of already in place by policy, because if you tried to arrest everybody in Vancouver who possessed small amounts of narcotics, you'd have to arrest half the population. Mm-hmm. I think he was guilty of exaggeration there.
Mm-hmm. He does have a flair. Have a flair. And you have to come with us, Geoff, because Mike and I have decided we're going to put on our best Hawaiian shirts and go throw some darts sometime.
Okay.
So, yeah. Sounds good. The measure of a non-elitist. All right. Let's take a minute, because I am curious. We have not had a chance to talk about this, the three of us, but it continues to be big events in US politics. And, just given your own experiences with campaigns, I'm curious, I'll start with you, Geoff, just the news that Biden has resigned, like how big a shift is that? And what's to watch next?
Well, to me, it was like a huge cloud lifting because it was quite obvious after the debate that he was mortally wounded. But the part that intrigued me was the debate that went on then among a number of people saying, are we ready for a black woman candidate? That kind of thing, which I found infuriating. And, how many times do we have to go through this? So luckily, once Kamala Harris got the nod, particularly from Biden, her campaign seems to have taken off. I mean, she raised a staggering amount of money in the first 24 hours. So that's not hardly re-elected president yet, but I thought the debate was kind of revealing, and that now Trump really is a bit on the defensive himself regarding age and mental acuity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the timing seemed pretty well thought out, and they seemed ready to pivot. I don't know if you saw this, Mike, but they seemed ready to pivot to supporting Kamala
Yeah, she had her ducks in a row. Probably smart by President Biden to wait out the RNC convention. And gosh, I mean, no one could have predicted the assassination attempt. So a lot has happened in the U.S. over the last couple of weeks. The debate, the assassination attempt, the RNC convention, now this. It's people are getting whiplash down there. I do wonder, or at least it's instructive as to what pushes leaders out at the end of the day. There was lots of talk in the U.S. that there's no mechanism to get rid of Biden. But clearly when your allies start moving against you, it becomes an untenable position unless you have something to reverse the momentum. And I look at, here in Canada, I look at the situation with Prime Minister Trudeau, who's having trouble pushing the pendulum back to the other direction. I look at Kevin Falcon, who's having trouble pushing the pendulum back in the other direction. What's not forcing them out is they're not getting that public internal dissent to the degree that Biden had to face in the last couple of weeks. It was very intense. So at the end of the day, you can get pushed out by your friends. It doesn't have to be a mechanism. It just becomes intolerable to stay. But we're not seeing that in the Canadian examples at this point. We've seen it in the past.
I think you get pushed out by your friends when they think you're going to submerge them. And, having run from office a couple of times myself, both winning and losing, I can tell you that when you start to lose, if you're paying attention, it's like being caught in a tractor beam and everything slows down. And people look the other way. Your calls don't get returned. It becomes almost a physical reality, which, if you're paying attention at all, is very, very difficult to fight against. And I think Biden was in that from about 5 minutes into the debate. And, because he was going to drag down the entire ticket, something had to be done, and higher authorities had to come into play, which they ultimately did. So a good thing for the election, in my view. Very good thing.
Well, let me pick up on something, because I really did enjoy hearing both of you speak with Bob about this last week. And thanks again to Bob Kronbauer for joining us, because I think he brought some really great perspectives last week. One thing you talked about, though, that I wanted to interrogate was, because I think it was you, Mike, just raising the point that, like, this isn't new. We're not immune to it in Canada in terms of the notion of an assassination attempt or threats of violence against electeds. I want to add a layer, though, and say, when this has happened, and I'm going to say this is true in the US too, and when this has happened in Canada, we've all kind of paused and gone, like, hell no, that's not right, and kind of all rallied from the same page to decry it. And I think there's a nuance to the moment in the US where there's a lot of sort of pointing of fingers and saying, well, this is a symptom of the divisive rhetoric that the Democrats have held up in calling Trump a threat to democracy, right? And then sort of the doubt on the sort of more left-leaning side of US politics that this was maybe staged initially by the Trump campaign. Like, it just didn't feel, it felt different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a sign of where the debate's at in the US.
Well, and let me add, we're just not immune to it. Like, if Bob was here, I think one point he would make, because I was thinking about it and I was like, I need to be careful in saying this, because I want to say, like, there's a big difference between Donald Trump and Pierre Poilievre. It is absolutely fair to say that, a big political distance. But on social media, the distance between those two is not much. My point is that while this is happening in the States and it's not here yet, the digital nature of how we consume so much of our political news and so much of what we just consume generally means those distances are just smaller than they've ever been before. I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, do we know what motivated the shooter?
No, we
At
don't.
the end of the day,
We don't.
and I think there's so much more to unpack on it, like mental health and social isolation, perhaps. Who knows where this 20-year-old young man was, where his head was at? Obviously, not in a good place. Big difference between us and the U.S. is that 20-year-old kid could go to Walmart or wherever and buy a, machine gun or,
well, he grabbed his dad's in this case, but yeah.
Yeah, well, still, but he had presumably had the legal right to bear arms, right? And that is not something we see in Canada to a great extent. Not that people can't get access to those guns, but it's not as easily done. And when we have had shootings in the past, sometimes it has been kind of ex-military or military people that have access to those firearms and who are not well, and they like Denny Lortie or the one on Trudeau. Now, it's not always the case. Mm-hmm. The shooting in 2014 at Parliament Hill was not a military person, but the point is, the gun culture in the U.S. makes these things more likely. Obviously, with the school shootings that happened down there as well. And I personally say, thank God we don't have those gun laws here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree, but I think part of the issue here is the rhetorical analysis, that came out wrong. There are things happening in the debate in the States and here which are reshaping how people see politics and hear political propositions. And when you see Pierre Poilievre, for example, speak directly to workers and in fact vote against an anti-scab bill, which I think Stephen Harper would never have done in a million years, a bill that's clearly pro-labor, you can see that he's prepared to do things to win votes that are completely different and than his predecessors on the right-hand side of the spectrum, and speak to a more populist approach, which I think is a healthy thing for them, and generally speaking, to start to listen to the aspirations of working people and people who've been marginalized. That's going to be a challenge here for the Trudeau team, but it's not as much of a challenge for Kamala Harris as it was for Joe Biden. And so I think part of the challenge on the Canadian side is to say, okay, we've seen Jagmeet Singh, for example, talk about the grocery barons and talk about grocery prices and so on. But I think there's room in politics to be way more explicit about some of these relationships. And strangely enough, the right-wing people, the J.D. Vances and the Pierre Poilievres, are kind of showing the way in that. And the left hasn't quite figured out how to respond. I think it's very interesting that Trump is getting so much support from billionaires who made their money as individuals in the tech sector. Doesn't seem to be getting as much support from billionaires or people who are multi-millionaires who are involved in any kind of production that really involves people, mobilizing them, handling a workforce, all that kind of stuff. I'm drawing a broad brush here, but you get what I'm saying. The folks like the Elon Musks, the Peter Thiels, and so on, who are writing colossal checks for Trump, have made their money because they had a great idea and rode an enormous wave, but they're not involved in politics in the way that most people are, and it frees up Trump to talk about some of these other issues in a peculiar way. I just think there needs to be a way more clear thinking on the center-left side of the equation about how to speak to people about what they're actually experiencing, rather than hand-wringing about the fact that they're responding to people like Poilievre who are more angry about a situation they themselves feel angry about. And I think that's going to be an issue in our coming election campaign this fall here in BC as well, because British Columbians, everybody tells me, and Mike, you work on polling and focus groups and stuff, are really angry. And James Moore challenged me on this point on this show a few weeks ago. How does that play out in terms of government approval and the campaign and so on? We'll have to see. I don't think it's going to be that useful to rely on past campaigns, if it ever is, for guidance on this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of Elon Musk, if I can just jump in for a second, he came out in the last week and endorsed Trump after the shooting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I see a Tesla in downtown Vancouver, I'm wondering what their politics are. Like, wow, EV driver. I guess you're supporting Trump. So anyways,
no. Each of these billionaires has the equivalent in annual resources of a small country. which they get to deploy as individuals. And we're not having that conversation. Like these guys put the Rockefellers in the shade.
It's a really interesting observation, your observation, Geoff, on the difference of the nature of the type of billionaire and who's supporting who. Because there are very different types of, there's an interesting, we paint billionaires with one brush, and I'm not too worried about their individuality or anything like that. But as so much as we sort of use it as an indicator of the sort of stalwarts of economic success, whatever else, there are important nuances, I think, in between billionaires. It's an interesting observation.
Well, one more crack about J.D. Vance, who I have a lot of time for because he's a smart cookie, but his statement that we should, as Republicans, they should, as Republicans, start to get used to the idea that some unions are okay. Example, police unions.
Right.
And some are bad. Example, Starbucks barista unions. Are you kidding me? I like police unions, but police, make a lot of money compared to most people, and they earn it. They earn it. I'm not begrudging them a penny, but Starbucks baristas are objectively underpaid and badly treated, in my view. So, what's he saying here? There's a threat here, right?
That the barista unions are more a threat to the franchisee owners?
Well, we can get behind the guys who pack guns and are the thin blue line, but we're not so keen on marginalized people, women of color, and so forth, getting more money to serve us coffee, which we take out and then throw the cup away. I don't know.
Speaking of baristas and people in the service sector, Trump made a big deal about saying no taxes on tips.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as a kind of policy that might have legs in Canada? Do you think that'd be popular?
But that's the right-wing version of virtue signaling.
Sorry, I don't understand. No taxes on tips.
No taxes on tips.
Sure, it's fine.
Because now everyone's tipping with their credit card, and now that I go back to my days serving. I was tipped in cash, so this was
and you reported all that, of course.
That's so onerous. Yeah.
Excuse me, as CRA, I'd like to report.
Are we recording? Shit, it's just us, right?
Yeah. Oops.
Oh, damn.
Meanwhile, back in British Columbia.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back in British Columbia.
British Columbia, exactly.
British Columbia is on fire.
Literally, we have a lot to talk about. So, wildfire situation, there's about 345 burning in the province, a very close call for Williams Lake over the weekend. The Minister of Transportation is warning that highways in the interior could be closed with pretty short notice due to this increased wildfire activity. Are being closed. Well, and that is an ongoing issue is kind of my point. Geoff, I know you've been sort of saying for a while, this is the thing, the issue to watch over the course of summer, just for what a challenge it could be for the EB government. Are we entering into that territory?
Well, I fear we are. I looked at the wildfire website today, the app that the government has. It's quite interesting. It shows historical figures. And although the number of acres burned is still kind of in line with some of our other previous terrible years, I think we're ahead of the game in terms of actual fires. We've had to bring in a lot of firefighters from outside the country and outside the province. Now we're faced with evacuees from Jasper who can't be accommodated in Valemount. And so this starts to cascade, and it's a huge strain on the system. So it's not clear yet how it's going to play out and what the political consequences are. But the number of hectares burned would have been eye-watering 10 years ago, is now kind of within the very broad range that we've had over the last 5 or 6 years. I think 2017, Mike, was just, during that electoral period, there was a big fire that year. It was a bit of a backdrop to the election campaign, and we'll see if that happens again. It wasn't the case in my view in 2020, because it was more after the season.
That's when they really get close to towns in particular, right? And you see the evacuations. I mean, we all remember the Kelowna fire, gosh, it's going back 15, 20 years now, which was a huge deal. But this year you've got small little places that are under huge pressure, like Spence's Bridge. And I'm quite familiar with the area that's being evacuated up the Venables Valley. And it's just, and that's close to where the Lytton fire was. And it's one thing to have the damage to the environment and towns, but just the psychological trauma year after year after year. The smoke, Ashcroft, has been in the thick of it this year and in recent years too. And Jackie Taggart, the MLA there, this is a very unfortunate part of her duties every summer, to be working with communities that are being evacuated. Um, and then further up north, just from those history buffs like myself, the fire is uncomfortably close to Barkerville right now. I think they have they're very kitted out with sprinklers and water protection there, but even still, if it's a rager, it's going to be tough. So people first, obviously, is our main concern, but those other kind of
there was a
important
big,
assets are troubling that they're under threat.
Yeah, and there was a big hike in spending, which the premier alluded to during various post-budget discussions, and a lot of investment in additional equipment and so on. But no one will care about that if they get overrun or if there's a widespread loss of property or worse, loss of life, which
It
is
just
always
feels like we're not throwing enough at these fires. And somebody will probably say it doesn't make a difference. These fires are so big, you're just not going to be able to stop. But I wonder about quick response. I wonder about whether we can do more to nip them in the bud. And this is not a partisan issue. It's just like, seriously, like, are we bringing a knife to a gunfight here?
Well, I
do
think
we
John
need?
Vallant's book, which was, written based on the
Yeah,
Fort McMurray fire by BC
yeah.
authors, fabulous book if anybody hasn't taken a look at it. But these are incredibly aggressive fires, and the mayor of Williams Lake said that on the interview I heard. And overnight, there were hundreds and hundreds of lightning strikes, which ignited scores of additional fires. But you're right, Mike. It is overwhelming, and I think the bigger problem for people, we saw this in Lytton, and we talked about it with the mayor of Lytton, is that for those who take the brunt of it, take it on the chin as they did in Lytton, it may be 3 to 4 years before you even have a glimpse of getting back into a home if the place
Yeah.
is knocked down. And I think that's very worrisome for some of these communities, Wells or worse, Williams Lake.
Well, from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint as well, I mean, BC's total emissions are, I can't remember the numbers, like 60 or 62 or 63 million
Megatons,
tons
yeah.
of emission, megatons or whatever it is. The number is like 60. And these fires might be like 500 to 1,000, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they totally make the rest of everything we do to reduce emissions insignificant. Not it's important we do it and morally and all that stuff. But from a GHG reduction standpoint, there's an argument to be made that we should be doing a lot more on fire suppression, a lot more. And that's, I think, once this fire season's over, I think it's a big discussion that BC needs to have, Alberta needs to have, the federal government needs to have about really upping our game here. Even if it makes a small difference, it would be a big difference, and not just in terms of damage to land and communities, but GHGs.
What does that look like? Like, in order to actually achieve those reductions, like what are the types of methods we could be doing?
Well, during the wintertime, this really well-established program that was proven effective at Logan Lake, which I think is now threatened again, but they went through on a fire smart program and dramatically reduced vegetation around buildings and made other very modest interventions, but they're not free and they're labor intensive. And they're not what British Columbians want to do, because most of the people who live in rural BC are maybe city dwellers who want to be in the trees or rural dwellers who have the same view. So, those are all difficult things to do. You can imagine on the Gulf Islands going around to people saying, look, I want you to take a 20-meter radius around your house and cut down all the trees. Not going to be well received.
Yeah, this feels like a deeper discussion, because I think your point's excellent, Mike, that there's an opportunity here. And I suspect it feels like one of those areas where when we start to think about the how and the logistics, it becomes layered.
Yeah, just on the politics, just because since we're a political show, just to cap it off with that, I mean, I don't feel like there's any positive or negative right now for the provincial government and how it's dealing with the fires. I think it's active nature. We're all dealing with that. I think when it does get close to towns and dealing with the evacuations, when things could get more interesting. The minister's been in the news a bit, not too high profile. I think probably good. She's probably got the right balance right now, but it's we're 2 months from the election starting here, and the next month is going to be crazy on fires. So watch that space.
Exactly. If I was in that office right now, it would be exactly the kind of thing I'd watch to say. And there could be a lot of circumstances that aren't exactly in your control. But when people don't, when the government doesn't have their backs on something, that won't matter. Okay, let's move to something actually that I think did seem to matter last week, which is the BC Conservatives coming out with their healthcare plan. It's the Patients First plan. It promises a wait time guarantee that would involve sending patients to clinics in the US and to other provinces. No costing, but the report did mention a Deloitte report that pointed out that suggested that healthcare costs could be reformed to be under 11% of GDP. I guess I'll mention also there was removing the vaccine mandates for healthcare workers. Mike, can I start with you? Because I'm interested, Rustad's been criticized a lot for not having sort of a clear policy, fleshed out policy platform elements at all. Clearly heard that. Is healthcare the right place for him to start? And how does this start look to you?
Well, I think it's interesting positioning. BC Liberal governments were always very careful on dealing with private healthcare, and in fact, took a case against Brian Day's private clinic. I think when Colin Hanson was the health minister, to the ire of many supporters who have deep pockets and who were very supportive of the private healthcare model being developed in British Columbia. Rustad's taken a bolder position and basically saying there should be a bigger role for private healthcare. And it may be that 10, 15 years on from that previous example, that the public may be willing to entertain something radically different than what the conversation's been in the past, because it's all around us, the failures of the public healthcare system. And, is just pouring more money into the public healthcare system the right solution? I don't know that there's a strong case for that. When Christie ran for leader back in 2010, 2011, I remember one of the promises we made was to keep healthcare spending to the rate of nominal GDP. Another way of saying, keep it below 10% a year, because healthcare is eating government. Healthcare spending is absolutely devouring the budget that could go to other things in government. At some point, you got to say, what's a sustainable approach to delivering public healthcare in British Columbia? Now, I don't think Rustad really figured that piece out, because I think he's actually contemplating spending more in the short run anyways. He
called it a big spike.
Yeah, to deal with the wait times. But I think it would be healthy for the province to have a energetic debate on public health care that goes beyond just the special interests and gets people engaged. There was a Royal Commission on Healthcare, I think under the Socreds, in the later stages of the Socreds. The Seaton Commission, was it, Geoff? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I don't think we've had anything since then, really. I mean, we had something called the Conversation on Healthcare, which I don't think really had the resonance that the previous one did. And I think something needs to happen here that gets public buy-in for some solution to how we're going to deal with an aging population and the inexorable increase in healthcare costs because of new technology. And we all want the latest cancer stuff, and it's going to be more expensive. And I think the Conservatives are tapping into that to some degree, and BC United, I don't think disagrees on a policy basis, because they're complaining that the Conservatives are stealing their ideas. So
yeah. Well, what I thought what happened with Rustad was that I'm not sure why he did it now. It was a long list of things that we all agree are inadequate in terms of current healthcare delivery. He identified all the problems we would all say about, family physicians and waiting lists and so on and so forth. His solution, he's trying to hide behind the term non-governmental service delivery, which is private care, which means you keep, instead of pouring a lot of money into one system, you pour it into two. And you divide the nurses and the doctors and so forth between those two systems. And in one of them, people are paid more and there's a profit and so forth. And this is a perennial debate. Now, we already have a mixed delivery system in a lot of respects for long-term care and a whole host of other things. All of our lab services are delivered on contract by private companies. But I agree with Mike. There's a big organizational question there. What I think Rustad has done is, especially by putting in this vaccine thing, is he's made it possible for the NDP to complain that it's about privatization. I'm not really following the share of GDP spending thing. Mike's absolutely right. It keeps going up. But the Deloitte report that everybody's pointing to was that's how big it would be by 2040. We're not close to 2040. So anyway, putting all that aside, when push comes to shove, people would rather spend more than wait for surgery. And we see that with the family care debate. Like the government has added hundreds of additional physicians since that crisis really hit hard in 2021, more or less. It was really being acute. It started to improve. It's not turned around. Many hundreds of thousands of British Columbians don't have a family physician. Likewise with nursing. I mean, he's talking about the problems of nurses, but the BC Nurses Union has had ads in the national press hailing the staffing ratios that they achieved in negotiations with the government as a model they want to see other jurisdictions carry. So I think notwithstanding the problems, the government has some great points to make about progress that's being made, as well as, and people laugh about this in the political sphere, the massive capital investments that are being made in new hospitals in various places. So, whether it's Cowichan or St. Paul's Hospital, which is very visible in downtown Vancouver, and many other locations. Many are frustrated that they didn't happen earlier, like Surrey and places like that. But the government's not going into the campaign with nothing to say. It's got a lot to say and has generally acknowledged where the shortcomings are.
Yeah, but that's government-itis, right? Like that's where you're going to go, Mike, right?
Well, yeah, you know what? Look, BC Liberals always had a lot to say about healthcare too, because you spend so much money on it. There's always new hospitals being built, but there's always complaints as well. And, I don't think anyone will say, or everyone will say perhaps, that Adrian Dix is one hell of a hard worker and he knows his file inside and out. He's also been health minister for 7 years. And politically, I wonder whether he can really sell it in this election. I wonder whether people have tuned him out a bit because he's just been there through thick and thin, but he's also wearing some of the healthcare issues that are there. So it's too late to change him going into the election. Obviously, the premier, I'm sure, has confidence in him. But I wonder whether a fresher face on this file who maybe has the promise of change more so would be a better fit for the NDP at this point. But I guess that's a moot point, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ship is sailed.
We got to move quickly today. Wow. Lots to talk about. So let's just do I want to take a minute and talk about nominations because there are some particularly notable ones. And I want to start with you, Mike, because there's some, I think you pointed them out in our earlier chat, just some notable Conservative nominations.
Yeah, a couple back to back this week. Yuri Fulmer in West Vancouver Sea to Sky. Yuri Fulmer is, a successful business guy who is, I think, currently Chancellor of Capilano University,
Correct.
Order of British Columbia. He has flirted with running in the past, but this will be his first run. And I think his candidacy is a sign of the Conservatives' growing strength in the business community. And for someone of Yuri's caliber as a business person to take the plunge is worthy of note. Now, sometimes I think we've talked about before, successful business people does not necessarily a successful politician make. And sometimes there can be serious, you can get the bends jumping into the depths of the politics from the surface.
Good analogy.
But he's obviously full of vim and vigor in seeing that. And that's a very interesting riding, which the Greens almost won last election. Same Green candidates running again. And it's Jordan Sturdy's riding. The BC United actually haven't picked a replacement for him yet. And the NDP are running Jen Ford, who's the past president of the UBCM and councillor in Whistler. So that is Richard Zusman's doing the most exciting ridings to watch in BC. I think he's at like number 62 right now on the list. So I am predicting that this will be in his top 3. So
nice.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move quickly, friends. It's time to.
Well, I'll just say the other candidate that announced today for the Conservatives, Melissa DeGenova in Yaletown, and that'll be another interesting one to watch. I can't remember how many times she was elected. Did you serve on council with her, Geoff?
Yes. Yeah. No, she was elected a number of times, like 3 or 4.
Yeah, for MPA. Yeah. So again, another step. Anyway, so that's the candidate wrap there.
Well, from Yaletown, we still don't know who the NDP is going to run in Yaletown. It's a new riding. Brenda Bailey kind of was in there before. She's running on the south side of False Creek now. So there's no incumbent. And I understand there's a lot of interest in who might fill that spot. Mike Farnworth, of course, renominated in his riding, so he'll be the longest serving MLA by a country mile. if he's successful, which I think he will be. The three who resigned their seats or announced they were not going to run again, Murray Rankin, Rob Fleming, Harry Baines. Haven't heard who's replacing them yet, or even when the
Bruce
nominating
Ralston.
meetings are in some cases. Yeah, Bruce Ralston, right. So there's a few to go on the NDP front, but it's mostly done. I think BC United is going to be struggling because the current 338 Canada aggregator shows them maybe winning 0 seats, which would be quite something if it proved to be the case.
Okay, we will come back to this. I mean, hopefully, I'd love to look at some of this one's rankings, maybe, and we can agree or disagree. But now, let's grab a drink.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Geoff just mentioned Brenda Bailey, and I have a Brenda Bailey brochure in my hands, which I received at my home. It was always good to get a newsletter from Brenda Bailey MLA, paid for by the government caucus, but she's not my MLA. I thought maybe they got the mail mixed up. Oh, she's running in my riding next election.
Correct.
So she's just making sure the neighbors know what a strong job she's doing as MLA. Got it. Paid for you by the BC taxpayer. Thank you. So that's a shot. Yes.
You would have insisted on that kind of attention to detail when you were in your old job.
Yes, Mike. I'm sure maybe they just got the postal code wrong, and a few extra brochures slipped across the line. But
is it the saying, glass houses something?
I'm sure that others have done the same. But anyways,
just need to point it out.
Tut.
Shot.
Raising a glass to, obviously this week with the fires, I'm raising a glass broadly to the BC Wildfire Service and everyone who's involved and engaged in that. Just brutal situations all over the place. Raising a glass to my friends and everyone who's been evacuated. A friend who's been evacuated from Wells. And obviously many others, Spencer's Bridge, Cooks Ferry, First Nation, lots of people impacted. And thinking of you, and raise a glass to all of you, and hopefully you're safe and sound soon.
I'll raise a quick glass to Harry Baines, the MLA in Surrey, who has been the Labour Minister since 2017 and a trade unionist for a long time in the IWA, later the Steelworkers, as it's now called. They joined, but Harry's a very interesting guy, very respected in the community, and when he looks back on his time at the cabinet table, I think he can take satisfaction in a lot of very material changes, including workers' health and safety and similar things that are done. A small one that may be of interest to people, I'll be very quick, was the crane collapse in Kelowna a couple of years ago where 3 young people died. One of the changes that Harry stick-handled through was that there was training given to WorkSafe and to RCMP investigators to make sure that if there was a terrible accident of that sort and a possibility of criminal charges, that the evidence was collected in a way that would support both a WorkSafe process and a criminal process. And in fact, the police have said they're considering whether or not a criminal process is necessary in that case. So that's a very important accountability measure, just one of many things that Harry did. And I wish him well in his retirement. Thank him for all his work.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna take a shot this week. I'm gonna take a shot at Kevin Falcon. We did start to get into it a bit, but I want to just pick up on his reaction to, I guess, having his policy homework cribbed by John Rustad and the Conservatives, and his reaction being, well, they stole my idea. There was an opportunity there, I think, to say like, oh, like, I'm glad you guys are finally waking up and acting like adults and understanding good policy and taking our great ideas. And I want to offer, I was reminded of Barack Obama at one stage had an anger translator. I think it was Keegan-Michael Key. He showed up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, right? And he would stand behind Barack Obama, and Barack Obama would do his kind of like chill, rise above it, like cool messaging. And then behind the anger translator would be like yelling. So I'm going to say Kevin Falcon needs a like resentment, desperation translator, and like just like exercise that person from your communications, and you got to show up cool and chill and whatever. And there's some really fun clips to watch on that if you need some inspiration on YouTube.
Oh, what? Poor old Kevin.
Poor old Kevin.
I will say for Kevin that he was Minister of Health for quite some time and was seen as a very engaged and active Minister of Health. And it's not something he's really leaned on. He talks a lot about being Minister of Transportation, but actually he had a significant stint as Minister of Health. So that's probably may explain part of his frustration. Why
I think it's fair to be frustrated.
Somebody else is mowing his grass. So
totally. No, I think it's fair to be frustrated. And I think he had a really good answer there. And I'm offering some entertaining watching to inspire going forward.
All right.
I want to thank our guest, Adam Olsen, today for joining us. I'll thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.